The real definition of mission, that is what I'm going to talk about, that is the experiential mission, meaning to say how I experience mission, entering novitiate in the Netherlands and signing up right away for the Philippines or for the missions. And then they asked me, what do you think about mission? Well, at the time when I was in the Netherlands, my idea of mission was not that specific, because it was only in novitiate that they asked me what are the various options. One of the options is then going to the missions, and well, the missions that we have, that is Indonesia, Brazil, Philippines. When we went to the Philippines, well, I still remember, that was 76, and the Carmelites arrived when I was still in the minor seminary in 63, 62, 63. Actually, we arrived, the first recognitions, that was in 58 already. And then the official establishment of mission here, of the church, of our presence, let us put it that way, presence of the Carmelites in the Philippines, that was in Escalante and in Toboso in 1962. When I arrived, that was the three people, fracking, fishers, and Uitbrink was then superior at the time, and Leopold van Burg, he was one of the people. He he got me from the airport, brought me to Looban, and Looban, we were, for me, Looban had no history yet. But seemingly it was the second place already where we were in the Philippines, in Manila, because first we were here in Cubao, somewhere. How did the Carmelites see mission here in the Philippines? Well, first of all, we followed the classic pattern, and that is, start where the people are. And where the people are, that was at pre-Vatican II, devotional kind of Christianity, and the devotional kind of Christianity that circled around masses, and then devotional. Then the great change came in, and then we entered also in the religious tenure, meaning to say, we arrived, and also on the boat, I arrived on the boat, last one I think, and on the boat we also were wearing normally our habit, and the habit was, according to the old colonial perception of colonies, it was tropical, so everything that was normally in the Netherlands black or brown, that was supposed to be here white. So we arrived in white habits, a little bit the so-called lighter version, whatever that meant. And in the habits, following the Dutch custom, we also went to the barrios for saying Mass and for the church work. That was the beginning. And we were following the custom at that time here in the Philippines. That was the Corpus Christi, more or less everything, the Corpus Christi idea of church. What is the church? The church is the mystical body of Christ. The only change that we got, that was when there was, by Monsieur Labayen, and so-called Congress on making the people aware in the church of the social reality here in the Philippines. That triggered actually our interpretation of Vatican II. So Vatican II now became the open door, the gateway to a new interpretation of church, and the church was then which was updated, aggiornamento, updated to the real situation, which means the political situation, the economic situation, and the cultural situation of the people, insofar as this was possible for us Dutch. This year, this kind of church was proclaimed in the beginning, but this time with the input of Vatican II. Vatican II, however, was to be interpreted by Dutch people for Filipino people. So you see already three things, three elements. You see Vatican II, and then you see Dutch situation, and then you see Filipino situation. So it is actually a third translation of what the church is supposed to be. This came across here in the Philippines as very advanced, very revolutionary, more or less, because this was proclaimed within a church which was devotional and which was only liturgical. And we had the liturgy, the novenas, etc. And we were asking, how come that the novenas don't have any effect on the people? You only make them more devotional, but don't change them politically or don't change them economically. For example, we had, when we arrived in Negros, we had heard that the north of Negros was the poorest part of the church in the Philippines because of the system of the hacenderos, and we thought, well, we go there, and with the old model of church, we try to bring changes. Well, the changes, we went to the haciendas, an oppressive system, which we simply didn't see yet, because many times we came upon invitation of the hacendero himself, and so our being church was a definition of church according to hacendero, according to Filipino, according to Vatican II, according to devotional. So it was a rather confusing idea of church. We worked also with this model for a couple of years, and gradually this changed here, and then for us an important thing that happened, that was the first water storm here in Manila, and then Leopold van Gogh, who was the superior at that time, or at least officially Egbrink was the superior, and Egbrink studied sociology in Louvain in Europe. Meaning to say, he came with an idea of European idea of sociology, first world idea of sociology, and wanted to replant this here in the Philippines, which was, of course, was very good, but you need the economic condition in order to do this. Well, what we followed, that was the classic idea of a mission, and that is, if you want to start a mission, start with a school. In order to run a school like that, you need a lot of money. And then where do you get the money? And the money you get from home, that means from the Netherlands, and then also, insofar here, from the people who were the actual owners of the school, that were the hacenderos. So what we got then, that is mission through the schools, in mission in which the idea of church was rather academic, rather scholar, and it was according to a Western interpretation of the general definition of church. The general definition of church is Lumen Gentium, light of the nations, according to the dogmatic constitution of the Church of Vatican II, and according to the dogmatic constitution for the pastoral definition of the Church, it is then Gaudium et Spes. But could we bring Gaudium et Spes, meaning to say joy and hope to the people? We could bring only joy and hope insofar as the Ascendero agreed to it. And insofar as the Ascendero did not agree to it, then we had to go to the so-called movement, as they call it at that time. So we were listening to two sources in the beginning. That was then the source of the church, and the church that was defining that. Then, according to Vatican II, the church as the people of God, and then also as mystical body of Christ. So that double definition of church. In the midst of, in the diocese also, insofar as we were working in the parish, when in the parishes in Negros, according to the diocese of Dumaguete, well, the people in Dumaguete, they saw the white people as, of course, as welcome people. But their way of thinking, they simply did not agree with that. And they thought, well, we will get you so that you will also start thinking the typically Filipino way of thinking, well, which did not work. So there was, from the beginning, a kind of tension between the Filipino church and the Filipino interpretation of church and the Dutch interpretation of church, and then the Vatican II interpretation of church, and the pre-Vatican II, the devotional church. That the devotional church and the pre-Vatican II church here in the Philippines, that lived on, and that was baptized in the sense that some of the more convenient things of Vatican II were accepted, but the less convenient things were simply rejected. Within the Filipino church, very concretely within the diocese, we had some people who, to various extents, followed the idea of Vatican II. The Carmelites, within this year, together with other groups, we were part of that so-called modern church. So the modern church also was not exactly a Vatican II church, but it was an interpretation of Vatican II. Over and against an interpretation of a devotional church and a hierarchical church. We accepted the idea, or we took over the idea, which was propagated by the church in South America, and that was the church of the basic Christian communities. So that was the church from below over and against the church from above. So the church from above, that was the hierarchical church. The church has become indeed more and more Filipino, but that takes a little bit more time than we thought. Also then the Filipinos are thinking, and also that the foreigners are thinking. But the good thing is the church becomes more and more Filipino, and also more and more Vatican II, but it takes more time than we thought. Well, that is a little bit the situation at the moment, also within the Carmelites reflected. We have to follow the transition in such a way that it is also tolerable by the physical body, because we are children of God and we have our own mission, and that is to bring the church to the people, to make the church into also a human church.